Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist.
On this show, we take your feedback very seriously. One of you wrote something very interesting and very pertinent today. You asked exactly what is happening in China, because different reports tell different stories. One report says China was flooded recently and it is running out of food. Another report says China has registered record exports. A third one says China is making big money by selling us medical supplies. A fourth one says that China is set to invest $400 billion in Iran. And a fifth one says that China's big corporates are collapsing. So which one is telling the truth? Is Chinese business booming or is it bleeding? It's a very good question, and my answer to this is very simple. If figures are coming from China, they're most likely fudged. Do not believe them. But it is a fact that the world is buying from China medical supplies and a lot of other things, and the Chinese are making money. The question that still remains unanswered is, where is this money going? China has been plagued by growing debt for years now, and that is not something new. But earlier, Beijing supported these failing companies. It propped them up with cash, with tweaked norms, with deadlines that kept receding. Well, now China is giving up on these state giants. And that could trigger a major crisis, which is why we say that state-run giants are sinking. And this could be a crisis not just for China, but for the whole world. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll talk about China's black hole of debt. Also on the show, Erdogan is losing friends left, right and center. America and Europe are set to sanction Turkey. Even Iran is upset because Erdogan recited a verse. We'll explain. Donald Trump may have lost the second term in office, but he's won what no American president has, a string of peace deals. The latest one is between Morocco and Israel. A big milestone in the India-Bangladesh friendship. A cross-border rail route is launched after 55 years. And the new immunity drink that the world is swearing by, donkey milk. Believe it or not, it is the latest fad. We'll tell you all about it, but we begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Under Lebanese law, have been established beyond reasonable doubt for the purposes of sentencing in a Lebanese court.
United Nations-backed Lebanon tribunal sentences Salim Jamil Ayash to life imprisonment. The Hezbollah member was found guilty of conspiring to kill former Lebanese Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri. Ayash remains on the run, with Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Shiite Hezbollah movement. The Hezbollah is refusing to hand him over, along with 3 other defendants acquitted eventually. Less than 24 hours after a female journalist's killing, another journalist has been killed in Afghanistan. Local media reports indicate that Kabul police have confirmed that Ariana's news presenter Fardeen Amini was killed in a mysterious attack. Amini's death comes a day after TV journalist Malala Maiwan's killing in Jalalabad city. Ethiopia's government has announced that it was returning Eritrean refugees to camps in the northern Tigray region, a move that the United Nations Refugee Agency said was absolutely unacceptable. The refugees are being taken from the capital, Addis Ababa, back to 2 camps they had fled from during a month of fighting between the military and a rebellious regional force because it is now safe and stable in Tigray. Hong Kong pro-democracy activist and media tycoon Jimmy Lai has been charged under the city's national security law. According to local media reports, Lai, an ardent critic of Beijing, has become the most high-profile person charged under the sweeping new law. A Uyghur man in Australia has been reunited with his wife and child after a 3-year campaign to release them from Xinjiang in China. In 2017, the Chinese authorities banned Abudu Salamu's wife and son from leaving Xinjiang by confiscating their passports in what became a high-profile human rights case in Australia.
Extremely happy for the family. They really deserve.
Argentina becomes the first major Latin American nation to take a decisive step towards legalizing abortion. The draft law, which would provide for the legal termination of pregnancy up until the 14th week, was passed with a majority of 131 to 117 in the lower house. A pro-abortion movement, symbolized by a green handkerchief, has swept through Latin America, where abortion is punishable by law. Indian Army Chief General Imam Naravne has met Commander of the UAE's Land Forces and Staff Major General Saleh Mohammed Saleh Al-Ameri. He discussed key issues of mutual interest and defense cooperation. General Naravne is currently on a 6-day tour of the United Arab Emirates and Saudi Arabia, in a first-ever visit by a head of the Indian Army to the 2 strategically important Gulf countries. Residents on Fraser Island off the coast of Queensland, Australia breathe after saving their homes from a deadly bushfire which burned through 80,000 hectares of wilderness. The fire, in a La Nina year which brings higher rainfall and lower temperatures, has sparked fears of another year of record infernos across wild forests. Patrick Reed has taken a 2-shot lead at the halfway stage of the European Tour's DP World Championships. Reed carded 9 birdies with a solitary bogey as he stayed on course to become the first American to win the Race to Dubai title. Matthew Fitzpatrick is 2 shots behind him after a 4-under second round, while 2017 winner Tommy Fleetwood is also in contention 2 shots further behind in a 4-way tie for 5th place. Rohit Sharma has been cleared to fly to Australia on Sunday to link up with the Indian Test squad after passing a fitness test. Sharma had injured his hamstring during the IPL, but he returned for the final 4 matches of Mumbai Indians' title-winning campaign and then continued his rehab in Bengaluru. But he will only be available for selection from the 3rd test, as he must serve 14-day hard quarantine on arrival with no access to training facilities.
China says its economy is back on track. It says it's the only country that will show some economic growth by the end of this financial year. Chinese exporters are doing record business. Chinese pharma giants are selling vaccines. It's a win-win story with lots of money flowing in. But scratch the surface and you'll find a glaring crisis. If so much money is indeed flowing in, where is it going? Why are Chinese corporate giants sinking? Why is Beijing not being able to save its companies? Here's a revelation. There has been a string of defaults in Chinese companies. And not from some random businesses. These are big companies backed by the Chinese state. They're all defaulting. They have not been able to pay back more than $6 billion this year. You heard that figure right, $6 billion this year. That is 40 billion yuan in bad loans. The lenders have not got their money back. So here's what we have. China is the world's biggest creditor, but it can't keep up with its own EMIs, defaulting. There is panic among global investors because among the defaulters are some major names. We have a list. It includes Brilliance Auto Group. It's BMW's partner in China. It has defaulted on $987 million of debt. The parent company of Brilliance Auto Group is Huachen Automotive. They too have reported defaults. Another big name is Tsinghua Uni Group. This too is a state-owned company. It has defaulted. It cannot repay the principal on a $450 million bond, $450 million. The company owes $2 billion in additional debt. Now investors are worried. Is their money lost? Will the company be able to pay back at all? The third name on the list is Yongcheng Coal and Electricity. It was known as China's Grey Rhino. Now it is known as a defaulter. It failed to pay back a bond worth a little more than $152 million. What's even more shocking is that this bond was rated AAA. AAA is the highest possible rating that any bond can get in the market. AAA bonds are considered the safest. But in China, a AAA bond just became a piece of junk. As I said earlier, all of these companies are government-owned. Why do people invest in a government-owned entity? Because it is considered a safe investment. The logic is, even if there is a default, the government will rescue the company. But in China, this logic is failing. Because here, the government cannot keep up with its own debt payments. Let me show you something. The size of China's debt crisis. By the end of this year, China's local government debt is expected to touch, listen to this, local government debt expected to touch $4 trillion. $4 trillion. Reports say there's panic. Current and former officials of China's finance ministry are raising an alarm. The risk of defaults is real. They have something called local government financial vehicles. These are basically financing companies. They're owned by the government. These companies, these government firms, have abandoned bond sales now and loan applications. They are supposed to raise money for government projects, but they're not getting any money now. They're struggling to get capital. The lenders are not confident about government bonds in China. So they're demanding higher interest rates. Do you know what all of this means? It means the money is drying up. Lenders are losing faith in China's ability to repay. The popular perception is that China is flush with cash. Breaking news, it isn't. China is mired in a debt crisis. It is humongous and it remains hidden behind clever accounting and state concessions. Let me give you one more example. Earlier this year, reports said that China's defaults had dropped by 20%. Those reports were misleading. Chinese borrowers were not making their payments. They had only delayed the default because Beijing gave them some relief measures. At least a dozen companies managed to survive because of this, thanks to delayed repayments, bond swapping, or cancellation of early repayment. These measures just bought time. They couldn't make the debt go away. And how much time can you buy anyway? So now those defaults are picking up. And the Chinese government is not willing to help. Last month, China's vice premier made a pledge. He said the Chinese state will show, quote-unquote, zero tolerance for defaults, which means that China is now willing to let state-owned companies fail. And it's already happening, by the way. In 2020, 10 state-owned enterprises defaulted on bonds worth 54 billion yuan. This was 42% of the total defaults. In the past 5 years, 25 state firms defaulted on a little more than 156 billion worth of bonds, billion yuan. So you see how much this crisis has grown from 33% in 5 years to 42% in 1 year. That is the extent of China's debt crisis. Why should you care? Because it will reach you. China's financial tremors will affect the whole world. All the investors who bet on China's growth story, and there are a lot of them, already the losses are running into billions. The defaults at Brilliance and Yongcheng triggered a major sell-off in the bond market. Basically, people who own the bonds of these companies sold them. And this led to a massive loss, $9 billion according to one estimate. So here's the whole story in a nutshell. China's state-owned companies are failing. China either doesn't have the money or the desire to keep them afloat. And this disaster will hit the whole world. China's state-owned enterprises, SOEs they're called, state-owned enterprises, they're the backbone of its economy. They make the engine that fuels China's growth juggernaut. But unlike the Chinese state, these companies are not insulated from the world. They have deep connections with the global economy, and if these companies fail, the world will feel the impact. So is China set to export a financial pandemic next? Our next report tells you more.
It began more than 40 years ago. Deng Xiaoping decided to put China on a new course. In the 1970s, the world had little idea about his plans. But Deng's decisions transformed China into a global manufacturing powerhouse. Many had hoped that the reform and opening up would move China towards a free market economy. But that hasn't happened. The Communist Party maintains its grip on the economy. It owns a large chunk of China's biggest companies. China is home to 109 corporations listed on the Fortune Global 500. Only 15% of these companies are privately owned. According to World Bank estimates, China's state-owned enterprises have a share of a little more than 23% in China's GDP. That may be just 1/3 of the Chinese economy, but state-owned enterprises remain critical to China's financial system, because they account for more than half of Chinese bank loans. On top of that, state-owned enterprises have issued some 90% of China's corporate bonds. These companies had the CCP's blessings. Banks did not hesitate in extending loans to them. Investors did not fear buying their bonds, because these companies were backed by the government. But now, defaults look inevitable. By 2018, China's state-owned firms owed more than $16 trillion, forcing China to draw up plans to reduce debt in 30 companies. But this year, the Wuhan virus forced companies to borrow more. Not every company has been able to keep up with the EMIs, and not every company will get a government bailout. Recently, Beijing has been more than willing to let state-owned enterprises default. Case in point, Huaqian Automotive Group, a state-owned automaker with ties to BMW. It failed to repay a bond worth close to $150 million. The crisis could get bigger. According to the Financial Times, Huaqian owes more than $5 billion to almost 70 Chinese and foreign banks. The lenders include 2 large government banks, the China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China. Singapore's DBS Bank is also among the list of lenders. Huaqian is just one case study. Chinese state-owned companies have suffered a string of defaults, and the Communist Party looks willing to let some of them fail. This has triggered concerns among investors worldwide, because if these companies collapse, the global economy will feel the tremors. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
If the Chinese debt bubble bursts, it could mean a collapse of the Chinese economy. But fixing that is not Xi Jinping's priority, because he is busy chasing his world domination dreams. China remains on the military offensive. After sending the PLA at the Ladakh border, the People's Liberation Army, the Chinese army, which is at the Ladakh border, Beijing is strengthening the Pakistani army, equipping it with weapons and now intelligence against India. Earlier this month, Pakistan and China signed a defense pact. It happened during the visit of General Wei Fenghe to Islamabad. He is China's defense minister and state councillor. He finalized a memorandum of understanding. Reports say the pact will help Pakistan track the movement of Indian forces across the border. Basically, they will share intelligence. This MOU seems to be a response to the growing defense partnership between India and America. Earlier this year, both countries inked the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement for BECA, BECA, a pact that would allow India to access data and information from the military satellites of America. So in response, Pakistan reached out to China, and Beijing is more than willing to help, it seems. China's military provocations are only growing. Earlier this week, the PLA kicked off a joint Air Force exercise with Pakistan near the border with India. This is the western border of India. The drill is called Shaheen 9. It is happening at the Bholari Air Base in Sindh in Pakistan, less than 200 kilometers from the Indian border in the west. China has sent its J-10 and J-11 fighter jets for this exercise. Pakistan is flying the Chinese and French fighters in its fleet. The drill seems like an attempt to raise the spectre of a two-front war. Let me quote from what the Chinese mouthpiece, the Global Times, said about this drill. The joint training, which is one part of the China-Pakistan military cooperation plan in 2020, will play a positive role in promoting the development of military relations, deepening practical cooperation between the air forces of the two countries, and improving the actual combat training level of the two forces. Pakistan and China are preparing for actual combat. On the eastern side, China is not backing down while the border standoff continues in Ladakh. Beijing is still using state media to push war propaganda. Take a look at the latest post from the editor of Global Times. It claims that the PLA troops stationed in Tibet are being equipped with exoskeleton suits.
今天背的是连队需要的一些吃的，还有菜，还有肉，还有粮。这一包20公斤，衣服以后对这个膝盖和腰还有防护的作用，非常的重要。
These suits will, quote-unquote, give Chinese troops a significant physical advantage in the border regions when troops on the other side of the line do not use such equipment and suffer from fatigue. That's what the tabloid says. Well, here's what we say. Keep it real. These suits, after all, are made in China. As far as the threat of a two-front war is concerned, Beijing cannot afford it yet. Its soldiers are engaged on too many fronts. And talking about multiple fronts and spreading yourself too thin, let's tell you what Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has been up to. Whipping up trouble for himself. Erdogan thought he would arm twist the European Union and get away with it. He thought he could provoke Greece with impunity. He could whip up religious hate against France, provoke Cyprus at sea, and nothing would happen. Well, Erdogan was wrong. Here's some news for Turkey, and it spells trouble. The European Union is ready to slap sanctions on Turkey. The details of who and what will be sanctioned is not out. But here's what's being reported. Number one, Turkish individuals will be targeted. Number two, sanctions will also hit Turkish companies, those that are involved in gas exploration. Number three, Turkish research and drilling vehicles would not be spared either. They could be prohibited from entering EU ports. They may also be blocked from procuring replacement parts. Number four, banks financing Turkish drilling companies may be slapped with European Union sanctions, which means that banks will stop dealing with Turkish firms. And that is not all, by the way. There is more bad news. We saved the worst for the last. Reports say the European Union could formally end talks on Turkey's membership to the EU. It is the end of Turkey's Brussels dream. Turkey applied for it first in 1989, and for 30 years it has been dreaming the European Union dream. Well, now it may be over thanks to the president. What does Erdogan have to say about all of this? He responded with his trademark brazenness.
Yani bu konuda Türkiye'ye yönelik
Any sanctions decision that can be taken against Turkey will not concern Turkey much. Since 1963, the EU is officially constantly imposing sanctions on us anyway. The EU has never acted honestly.
Bu yana Avrupa Birliği bize zaten sürekli yaptırım uyguluyor.
He said this 2 days back. Sanctions will not concern Turkey much. This is what Erdogan says. Well, he's lying. Sanctions will hurt Turkey's business interests. The scale of the injury will be known as soon as the EU publishes a list of the sanctioned individuals and entities. The fear of secondary sanctions will also isolate Turkey from trade partners. Sanctioning Turkey was a matter of credibility for the European Union. They had to do it. As for Erdogan, his list of bad news is not yet over. He may claim to not care about EU sanctions, but here's something that will surely give him sleepless nights. American sanctions, well, they too are coming soon. The United States is planning to impose sanctions against Turkey. What for? For Ankara's acquisition of the Russian S-400 missile defense system. Reports claim the announcement could be made before the 12th of December. According to Reuters, the US sanctions could hit Turkey's presidency of defense industries. It could also target the institution's head, Ismail Demir. Turkey bought the S-400 system in the year 2019. Under CAATSA, or the Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, America can impose sanctions on countries that engage with the Russian defense industry or the intelligence sector. Well, Erdogan did not see this coming. Here's what he said on the 9th of December.
Sayın Biden,
let Mr. Biden take office first. Presumably once he takes office, we'll sit down with Mr. Biden and talk about certain issues.
Oturup bazı şeyleri konuşacağız.
It's a double whammy for Erdogan. Sanctions from America and Europe would hit Turkey's economy. The virus from China has already battered it. There is double-digit inflation. There is slowdown. Turkey's foreign reserves are drying up. And now the Turkish lira has weakened as much as 1.4% following the news of the sanctions. Let's now talk about what Donald Trump has been up to. Well, he's not getting a second term in office. He's been busy, though, in the last few months of his presidency, not just with the election, but also with a peace deal that he promised right after he took office. Donald Trump said that he would deliver the deal of the century, and he has. Now the list has extended to 4 countries. 4 countries have normalized relations with Israel. The latest one is Morocco. Here's a report.
4 years ago, Trump promised a peace deal. 3 months ago, he delivered it. Just before the US election, the UAE and Bahrain established diplomatic ties with Israel. It was a seismic shift in West Asian politics. The deal was called the Abraham Accords. As Trump prepares to leave office, more countries are signing the deal. The latest is Morocco, another Arab nation making peace with Israel. The road was uphill. To enable the deal, America had to change its policy toward Morocco. Morocco's claim over the Western Sahara. Western Sahara is a former Spanish colony. It has been controlled by Morocco for the last 40 years. No country recognizes Morocco's sovereignty over the region. Now America does. That's how important the peace deal was for Donald Trump. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu lost no time in thanking him.
I've always believed that this historic day would come. I've always worked for it. I want to first thank President Trump for his extraordinary efforts to expand peace, to bring peace to Israel and the peoples of the Middle East. President Trump, the people of Israel and the state of Israel will be forever indebted to you for your magnificent efforts on our behalf. I want to thank, too, the King of Morocco, King Mohammed VI, for taking this historic decision to bring a historic peace between us.
Trump may not have won a second term in office. He leaves as one of America's most embattled presidents. But this is a foreign policy win like no other. Donald Trump has accomplished what his predecessors promised, tried, and failed at. He got the peace deal that they couldn't. Under Trump, Israel has normalized ties with 4 Arab nations. For the last 7 decades, most Arab countries have boycotted Israel over its dispute with Palestine. Now that has changed. Other nations are expected to sign similar deals. They have Saudi Arabia's blessing, but Riyadh itself isn't ready to sign on the dotted line just yet. Donald Trump's efforts have a big role to play in this shift. The shifting sands of Arab politics have done the rest. The Gulf states and Israel have now found a common enemy in Iran. Palestine has been relegated to the back burner. Sunni Arabs and Jews are now allies, with Shia Iran threatening both, and Donald Trump claiming credit for delivering what he calls the deal of the century. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
India and Bangladesh are writing a new chapter in their relationship. A rail route is set to open after a gap of 55 years. In an effort to speed up connectivity between the two countries, leaders from both sides are set to hold a virtual summit next week. A lot more is on the cards. Our next report has the details.
These tracks survived the partition in 1947 and the war in 1965. Now, trains will ply on these routes one more time. India and Bangladesh are set to reopen this rail line after a gap of 55 years. It's the route that connects Haldibari in West Bengal to Chilahati in Bangladesh. Prime ministers of both the countries will inaugurate the rail line next week, when they meet for a virtual summit on the 17th of December. But that's not all. Reports claim at least 4 MOUs can be signed next week. These agreements are expected to boost bilateral cooperation. The summit is the culmination of a series of overtures that New Delhi has made to Dhaka. In August, India's Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla had travelled to Bangladesh to boost cooperation. Prime Minister Modi had sent a personal message to Sheikh Hasina through the Indian diplomat. Visit was fruitful. Since then, India and Bangladesh have focused on speeding up several connectivity and transit projects. Both countries have now set up a new mechanism to review the ventures. This includes an oil pipeline and 2 cross-border rail links set to be completed in 2021. The Chilahati-Haldibari rail line was also brought under the same mechanism. At present, 28% of India's development budget goes to Bangladesh. That translates into $10 billion, a significant investment to counter the dragon's growing influence in India's neighborhood. Now, both countries are ready to kick off a new phase in their relationship. Bangladesh has invited Prime Minister Modi to visit Dhaka next year for the 50th anniversary celebrations of the liberation of Bangladesh. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Donkeys are generally dismissed as useful beasts of burden. But with the coronavirus pandemic raging, they've become the new stars. There is a newfound interest in donkey's milk. So why is it a rage to consume donkey's milk? This report tells you.
Donkey's milk is the elixir you may not have heard of. Famed as a luxury and a cosmetic product, the queen of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra, is believed to have regularly bathed in donkey's milk to add luster to her skin. And now, everyone in Albania wants to slurp this glass of goodness. Wondering why? According to locals, the vitamin and nutrient-rich milk could act as an immunity booster. And with the coronavirus pandemic raging across Europe, donkey's milk is in great demand.
The increase in demand is linked to the benefits of this product, to its medicinal virtues as a regenerating supplement for the lungs. It can treat a cough, bronchitis and asthma and help boost immunity.
No one claims donkey's milk to be a cure for coronavirus. But on the basis of the local legends, the residents in Albania swear by its benefits.
I came to the farm to help my parents, who have just had COVID. And on top of the medicines they are taking, donkey milk can be a good remedy for their respiratory system.
Even the donkeys seem to be having a good time. There are very few farms in Europe where donkeys are specifically bred for their milk. Often condemned to slug it out as the beasts of burden. This farm in Albania, to extract maximum milk from the donkeys, wants to provide them with a life of comfort.
To collect the milk, you must be attentive, establish a relationship of trust with the donkey, not be severe, beat her or stress her, but caress her, tickle her, and then milking her requires patience and delicacy to avoid any negative effects for the teats and udder.
In times of COVID, donkey milk is witnessing an unprecedented boom. More farms are taking to donkey farming. The humble beast, which traditionally was used to carry loads on the mountain slopes of Albania, has become the center of attention. The high demand has also jacked up prices. A litre of donkey milk now retails for as much as 50 euros. In a country where the average wage is a meagre 400 euros a month. So when do you plan to indulge in a glass of creamy donkey goodness? Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
I have mixed feelings about that one. But every religious festival was scaled down this year. And they all look very different. They felt very different. Christmas, we're told, will be no exception. Courtesy the Wuhan virus, Christmas celebrations too will have to be scaled down. Christmas bazaars will not spring up in every corner of your town. Streets may not be all that decked up. Midnight masses may be virtual. Turkeys may not make their way to the oven. And the catching up over eggnogs will have to be done online. And here's another thing that will be different this year. The nativity scene. It is going minimalistic. The nativity scene is an exhibition representing the birth of Jesus. There's baby Jesus, Mother Mary, Joseph, the three wise men, shepherd, sheep, angel, farm animals. The characters from the scene remain constant. How you depict the scene is up to you. Some people use model figures. Then there are living nativity scenes in which real humans and animals participate. This year, a nativity scene made of pizza is making headlines. But it's a one-off, we can tell you. The bigger trend looks something like this. Minimalist nativity sets made of liquor chocolates, wood blocks, stained glass. Minimalist nativity has taken the internet by storm. People are using everyday items to recreate the birth of Jesus, from soda cans to bamboo, floor cleaners, tissue papers, licorice. Nothing is being spared in this creativity challenge. From spices to cutlery, flower pots to poker chips, wine glasses, nail paints, hair clips, you name it. If there's one thing these photos tell us, it is this. The pandemic has made us extremely creative. A special mention to this lab edition nativity scene. Could anything be more in tune with the times? A British tourist in Taiwan is now on a mission to clean up the Tam Sui River in the new Taipei city, one of the island's longest rivers, unable to travel back to the UK due to the travel restrictions during this pandemic. He is now part of a massive cleanup drive in the city. Here's his story.
The pandemic may have changed Peter Lowe's travel itinerary, but he's using his time in Taiwan productively. Lowe arrived in January to visit his son, who lives near the Tam Sui River bank in New Taipei City. And he couldn't return to the United Kingdom due to travel restrictions during the pandemic. And so this boating enthusiast shifted his attention instead to the dirty riverbanks in Taipei, which were littered with rubbish and plastic waste. His focus currently is the Tamsui River, one of the island's longest rivers.
I enjoy my boating thoroughly. I always have liked boating, and I just discovered a wonderful river. We saw what was happening in the river, so we decided to collect some rubbish in our bags and get rid of as much as we can. There's too much. There's too much rubbish coming down from the cities.
Lo bought and repaired a rowing boat. He now rows across the rivers in Taipei and handpicks plastic and garbage lining the pockets of rich mangrove forests. Lo's initiative is warding off future crises, because this hidden waste could potentially wash out into the ocean during a dangerous storm or typhoon.
You can stay there.
And Lo is not alone in this endeavour. Other environmentally conscious boaters have joined in and are now striving to save Taiwan's rich and diverse ecosystem. This mangrove forest, for instance, is one of Taiwan's largest urban conservation areas.
You don't feel it's too serious when the garbage is dispersed in the water. When Peter took us to the edge of the mangrove forest, we realized that the garbage is a big problem. Sometimes we need an outsider to point out the problems. We can be so used to our surroundings that we are numb and insensitive.
Lo and his fellow boaters and their efforts have not gone unnoticed. The local city government has pledged to allocate more funds and resources to this cleanup drive.
We can do without plastic. You don't need plastic.
The world is now staring at a climate emergency. Approximately 300 million tons of plastic waste is generated each year. This figure is only bound to increase in a post-pandemic world, as masks and PPE kits become a necessary part of our lives. Perhaps more good Samaritans like Peter Lo could help in tackling this crisis. And what we all need is a plastic revolution. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Almost a year since the Wuhan virus outbreak, the Wuhan wet market has become a symbol of the fierce political and scientific battle raging around the origin of this virus. It has altered China's diplomatic relations, reshaped the country's massive food supply network.
For over a decade, 38-year-old Wuhan restaurant owner Lai Yun walked these tiny steps to get to the back entrance of his Japanese seafood restaurant and began his hectic workday from behind the counter. All that changed on December 31st, 2019, after 4 cases of a mystery illness were linked to the market, which led it to shuttering overnight. By the end of the month, the city had begun a grueling 76-day lockdown. For many locals, the stigma surrounding the market and lingering uncertainty over its role in the pandemic is a sore point. There is also fear towards seafood, which remains at the heart of Lai's restaurant cuisine.
But it will definitely make people panic. When consumers hear the word seafood, the first thing they think of must be Japanese food. And we will not eat it then, because Japanese food is not a necessity.
The market's closure and subsequent public panic about the safety of imported seafood also increased the cost of procuring some ingredients 5-fold.
Now we stock up through certain supermarkets. These goods cost me about 240 to 250 yuan today. If we bought from the Huanan seafood market like before, we should be able to get the same amount of goods for half of the price, about 120 yuan.
Wuhan hasn't reported any new locally transmitted cases of COVID-19 since May. And the empty market is one of the few visible reminders of the city's early role in the outbreak.
Now you see enthusiasm and optimism in Wuhan people, but in fact people still have huge trauma deep in their hearts. If there is a clear statement, even if it is confirmed, we could face it correctly. But there is no way to face it now, and I don't know what is going on. So I still hope that we could get an official statement if possible.
Access to the area remains heavily restricted. Experts say the market still plays a role in the investigation and is therefore unlikely to be demolished. A team of World Health Organization experts has yet to visit Wuhan. And Beijing continues to spar with the United States and other countries over the origin of the virus. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Wrapping up with that, we're leaving you with Gravitas Images as always. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.
Thank you, going for it. Oh no, you're staying. Oh, Andy.